Welcome, everyone. Today, we are going to dive right in to the news of the attacks that have happened on U.S. troops in Jordan at the base there from Iran as the World Cup has ended and Trump has immediately turned his focus towards dealing with the failed MOU that was presented between Iran and the United States and what this means for the effects of the midterms as we grow closer and closer towards this time crunch as we're entering into the final week and crossing over the ninth of all and this historic time historically this time of the year. So stay with us today as we dive into the news and dive into these topics and figure out how do we navigate this as prayer warriors and intercessors for this nation and the office of the president, and even for those joining in internationally. Well, welcome everyone. We are back to our regular schedule here, at least for Mondays, in our pipeline report as we get closer and closer to the midterms. I have on with me Pastor Tim, joining us from the deep layer of his own home in Shreveport, Louisiana, as I'm here in studio getting some construction work done here at the property in Shreveport and making progress. But we turn our attentions to more important matters, and that is of how do we continue to pray for the president and his administration in this season as we are continuing down the dire straits here of entering into the ninth of Av, as we're seeing now attacks both from Iran and from the United States on each other and bases, and unfortunately a loss of life over the weekend. Many on both the right and the left here in America are upset, saying we didn't even need to be involved in this, that they lost their life indiscriminately, and because of this, that, and the other, and we should just avoid all this at all cost. And Trump's and the administration's position is, look, is this is who we're dealing with. We're negotiating with people. Um, uh, Trump is now calling them bad faith actors, finally to the point. And some interesting things have come out with Vice President J.D. Vance and where he stands on some things that I think if we wouldn't have gone through this, we wouldn't have known. And these are very important as we get to the 2028 election. But more pressing is the Save America Act that's coming up this week, the fear of the government shutdown, and the coming looming midterm elections as we move forward. So, with that, let's talk about what's going on with Iran a little bit, what's going on with Republicans and Democrats when it comes to the SAVE Act, and how can we stay focused as intercessors here praying on the wall for this nation and the office of the president.
Well, it's good to be back from California, each and every one of you. Thank you for following us on the pipeline, and all my California peeps. I thank you for following us as well. I know some of you watch each day on pipeline, and so we're so grateful to each and every one of you. California is a big state in the elections, and so we are always out there pushing, trying to activate the body of Christ out there. We are in a difficult season, obviously. Don't forget the word that Chuck Pierce released a few weeks ago about 4 months of darkness. And then, we'd see an end to that. God was going to give us vision in the midst of that, and we'd see things and operate in things we've never operated in before. That's the fullness of the word. I kind of paraphrase it, but that's basically the idea of the word. 4 months obviously leads us to the midterm elections. That's what we want to focus on today, especially praying, recognizing that what the word of the Lord is, it's going to be dark. So don't get discouraged. I mean, we're having a warning from the Lord that says that's what it's going to look like. It's going to look like we're not doing well at times. It's going to look like the enemy is going to prevail. but we have to trust the Lord. And I like the idea what he said, or I shouldn't say the idea, the part of the word that says we will see better, and that's what we're trying to do here on Pipeline, and our ministries here at our ministry here is that we can see and give you revelation, and then you can help us as well. You have a chat on your on the Facebook page as well as on the YouTube page. Just put your comments in there, what you feel like the Lord's shown you as well. That helps us try to get a consensus of what the Lord's saying right now. The war in Iran. Let's talk a little bit about that, Zach. What's going on there? We did have some troops that were killed this past weekend in Jordan. I think some of it was intercepted. Obviously, sometimes that doesn't stop everything from coming in. I know the Iron Dome is based or placed in Jordan right now. Israel's helping out Jordan and the U.S. Military there with the Iron Dome, and I know they said some of it fragments made it through, and so we had some troops that were killed there. There also was some reports that there have been quite a few injuries during this battle that the Pentagon doesn't want the world to quote know, and I understand why. Everybody gonna get mad and say, "Hey, you need to tell us everything," but you don't want to let the enemy have information that they're being successful at some of their attacks. I think that's something that we just wisdom in battle. I know President Trump is very upset, and this is where we're going to push it a little bit toward the midterms because these are the kind of headlines that are going to really affect the midterms because we don't need bad news coming out of there. Obviously, most Americans had pretty much forgotten the Iran issue during the ceasefire. Gas prices started dropping. The economy started thriving a little bit. So it's kind of out of sight, out of mind. But now it's back. And obviously, the left and those in the Rhino part of the Republican Party are not happy. They want him out of there. And they want us out of there. I want you to understand something. Talking to some military people that are stationed in that area, they're being told now that they're going to be there probably for another 10 months, at least stationed in that area. Now, that can change, obviously, if the situation turns. But what they are saying is that they expect this to be a long term battle, not that we'd fight for 10 months, but basically they have to stay in the region that long to assure that this thing is finished and that the straits are open and that everything can flow. And this is all part of the dire straits because the Hormuz Straits is a type and shadow of that. It's very difficult to get through. America's been bombed, I think, the ninth consecutive night. So we are in a intense battle. So let's go there, Zach. How do we think this is going to affect the midterms? How do we think this perception is going to affect? I know Joe Rogan said recently that, of course, Joe Rogan's Joe Rogan. I don't put a lot of weight in what he says, but he did say that this is going to kill the midterms for the Republicans. That Trump screwed up. He shouldn't have got involved here. And yet that's a lack of wisdom or understanding of the what's going on the ground there. But let's speak about that.
That's that's an analysis, one way of putting it. And the midterms are usually low voter turnout issues in elections. Um, so the challenge is, and this is Trump's challenge, is to make this a big enough election to where enough people come out and vote. The Republicans have a major issue, as do Democrats, depending on the issue. But on this issue specifically, the issue is how they stand. You're seeing this, and the reason this is important to bring up is because JD Vance is a part of this. He's a part of a political divide, and he was on Joe Rogan, or at least the show he was on, got published last week with JD Vance, and it made him look really horrible, and to some degree unpresidential in a lot of people's eyes, mine not included. And so the analysis here in looking at this is, how does Trump get a coalition to move forward? Now you have Senator Lindsey Graham, who recently passed away. How do you replace him? How do you fill that out? There's talks of his sister filling that out. They're going to go through a primary process where the people of South Carolina can have a say in that. That's important because the Senate is very thin margins, as well as in the House. So you have these thin margins. How is it going to play out? Who's going to be motivated enough to get out and vote? And what you have is you have older demographics who um, are more in the Trump wing and thinking, okay, look, these attacks are good. There's reasons you need to go after them. One of the attacks that they hit last night after the bombing on the base in Iran was at a nuclear facility that they were starting to rebuild. The United States wiped that out. It's the ninth night, and it doesn't look like they're stopping anytime soon. This is after Trump, talked about how the people that they're negotiating with are good faith actors, they're very intelligent, et cetera stuff. He has since immediately, since last week, changed his tune, and these are the worst of the worst people, et cetera, things like that. And so the challenge will be is, okay, if Joe Rogan is right and what he's saying operates the mindset of your younger demographics are being persuaded by the likes um, of former news hosts, of the new online media, and then you have former quote unquote former conservatives who are kind of eating themselves, and they're kind of being exposed right now in a good way, especially with the Charlie Kirk situation. And I'm being careful not to say names because these people are going after people who say their names and play their clips and shutting them down and copywriting them and getting their channel shut down. So we're having to be very careful as far as who we say. But if you're following the news, hopefully you understand. And the challenge is this is, will the younger Americans and will those who are your flybys, uh, voters who don't really fully understand, will they engage enough? Will they be open enough to, in a sense, kind of give Trump the benefit of the doubt in this season and in this moment? A lot on the right are giving him that kind of leniency there, and this is where we need to pray for him because a lot of people don't necessarily agree with him. Then there are some who are strong and adamant that, hey, this is the action that needs to be taken, and there's an argument for both sides. The challenge is one, as believers, where does the Lord stand? But two, as we look forward for the president, is what decisions does he need to be making moving forward? And if you understand the MOU, you understand what was being negotiated. There was nothing on the table. And I know JD Vance went on Joe Rogan and got really upset about the backlash that he had. People, kind of challenging him and bringing adversity to him. But at the end of the day, it's like, look, if he's going to be president, he's going to get mass adversity, and he's got to be able to handle it well if he were to be in that position. And he's showing, unfortunately, not, because the theories and the counter active towards him was a great assessment of what was happening and a challenge. And that deal that was put on the table was worse, 10 times worse, some quadruple times worse than the Obama deal. And so he didn't like the pushback on that. So here we have the White House split. We're seeing it publicly. That has been going on behind the scenes for months now. And so, but back to your original question, I know I kind of went on a rant there, but it's like we have to set this framework and this picture here of the dynamic of what's going to come to the midterms, and who's going to actually get out and vote, and how educated are they going to actually be on people. And we're seeing here in Louisiana, if you just have that Trump voter seal saying Trump endorses you, that person is going to win. Whether that's the right person or not is still up in the air. And so now we have to wait and see what comes of these elections that come out. Will there be enough for the House? Will there be enough for the Senate for him to be effective and get things passed like the Save America Act?
Yeah, I think Trump's endorsement record is like 90 something percent. I can't remember of all the candidates he's endorsed that have won. Louisiana is a classic case. He endorsed Congresswoman Letlow in our Senate race to take over Cassidy's seat, and she didn't have to do any debates. She didn't have to hardly show up anywhere. Basically, just put her name out there, and she won handedly the election, the primary election, and now goes to the final in November against the Democrat. Now let's look at let's pivot here. Let's look at all the primaries that are coming up. I want to show these to you. These are the ones that are coming up here. put us in here too. There we go. These are, I hope you can read this. I made as big as I could.
Yeah,
These
that's
are the
good.
ones that these are ones that are coming up. We got one tomorrow in Arizona. This is the Arizona statewide primary election. This is big because of the governor's race is at stake there. If you know, I think her name's Hobbs, if I remember right. She's the governor there. She has vetoed so many conservative pieces of legislation that the Arizona House and Senate has passed, but she just vetoes it. I mean, the House and the Senate there vote the will of the people, and she, because she's a socialist, she literally vetoes everything, and they don't have a supermajority, so they can't override. She's got to go. There's a Trump candidate in there, and then there's also a former congressman that's running for the governor, a Republican, who says that the Trump endorsement is too MAGA for a purple state. So we'll see how that plays out. Anything's better than Hobbs, I'll say that. So we got to pray tomorrow, especially lift up Arizona tomorrow. Also Saturday there's the one there, the Maine. In Maine is the Democratic Party U.S. Senate nomination after Planter dropped out, and that crazy that Senate election. I never thought I'd be shouting Collins' name so loud. The Republican, it is looking good for her because of the infighting among the Democratic Party there. But Maine is an unusual animal.
Well, you see why Collins keeps winning, because of how the Democratic Party and who they keep putting. They thought that a Nazi predator was their best chance of winning. And so that now you see why Collins continues to win.
So then we go on to the ones after that will be Kansas on the 4th. Let me make sure I got all these. Yeah, that'll be the next one. Kansas on the 4th. And then we have another one, Michigan. This is another one. This is a crazy election here in Michigan because there's a radical Muslim running. I actually have a clip. Let me see if I can find that of what's happening there in Michigan. This is a purple state, and could be a crazy thing here. Let me play this clip. Let me see. Okay, I'm sorry, it's not playing. Hold on. Let me pull this up here because why don't you speak about Michigan, what you know about it, Zach, while I get this ready.
Michigan is very blue, and it's been going darker blue, and you have challenges where it's being taken over by immigrants who have questionable entry points, but then also have ideologies that we're seeing similar to what's happening in Minnesota, where they have no aspirations of assimilating into America. And that's kind of the big debate right now. And the challenge is, we're no longer a melting pot, is we're not learning and coming and coming accustomed, as far as the immigrants who are coming and saying, yes, I agree to what America stands for. I agree to live by the laws that are on the books. They want to come in, change it, live by like how they lived in the country that they left.
Yep.
And that's the major challenge in places like Dearborn and mass takeovers of society, to where even Christians are being told leave, which is very, very disheartening.
Yep. Here's the analysis of that race.
Oh, Hugh, one thing I find interesting about democratic socialism is the people and the demographic of the Democratic Party that are supporting this type of candidate. When you look at black voters, 67% of them are backing Haley Stevens, and only 21% are backing Abdul El-Sayed. But when you look at white voters, 51% are backing El-Sayed, 39% Haley Stevens. And then you go to the college-educated voters, 48% El-Sayed and 41% Haley Stevens. So it just shows you that the base of the Democratic Party really don't back this type of stuff.
It's a fascinating primary in Michigan, Lawrence, for a number of reasons. You've got about 200,000 Muslims in Michigan who are mostly Arab American. Got about 100,000 Jews in Michigan. They're going to vote overwhelmingly for Stevens. She's heavily backed by AIPAC. She's very pro-Israel. El Sayed very critical of Israel. But I go back to 2016 when Hillary Clinton mixed it up with Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders won the Michigan primary in 2016. Now, President Trump carried Michigan handily in 2024.
So it's a tough analysis, if you ask me, of like how we're going to play this out because of what's going on there. I think he's the guy that claims to be a doctor and he's not. I think that's part of the battle there. Apologize. Let me get out of this.
Here we go. You're back.
Okay, I'm back. I'm sorry. So we are at a place. I hope I'm not hearing that, but I want to just keep praying into Michigan because Michigan, I think, is a critical election because it's almost like a bellwether state for America. Kind of what happens there is we've watched in the past elections, presidential elections especially, it was a swing state, a major swing state. So I think this is where we have to vote and properly and pray for that. And it also has the largest voter fraud that has been uncovered. If you remember, we covered that about how they would have the same address on everybody's ballot there, and come to find out they tried to I think they removed most of those people's vote, but the fact is it is wrought with corruption, and I think that's our biggest battle coming in the midterms. Let's speak a little bit, Zach, about President Trump's speech. I didn't get to watch it. I was in California. I saw the headlines of his speech about the election fraud that he brought out about the Chinese tapping into our voter rolls. I know part of that was because those voter rolls are somewhat public. They're not always secure because people can grasp those, especially on foreign, like our military people that are overseas. Those are gained because they allow election cycles here in America to have those addresses and those names because they're trying to campaign them while they're out of the country. Well, China tapped into that information. Some of that was very sensitive. They said actually these are hidden spots where some of these soldiers were, and the Chinese were able to find exactly where they were located because of this public availability of this information. So not all of it was that like they tapped in and stole straight voter roll stuff. I think there was a misleading headline on that issue, but the fact was they did tap in what was available, what they could tap into. But this is on President Trump's thing. From what I understand, none of the main media sites even covered the speech. I think Fox always did, Newsmax, places like that. But the left didn't even cover the speech, which I think in past, this would be probably the greatest or the biggest story ever to hit the headlines, was proof that there was voter fraud, and now it's not even being covered, so the left's not even realizing what actually happened.
Well, it's a very vague term that he used as far as voter fraud. What we do know, what you're talking about, is what China has tapped into is the fact that they are targeting and they're trying to persuade Americans based on publicly available data that organizations like that can gain access to. I think it's upwards of 220 million Americans. And what they were trying to do is advertise to them, get them to look at things differently. So we're a country of a little over 300 million people. That's more than 2/3 of the country that they're going after and trying to persuade to vote the way China thinks and the way China operates. And what Trump did say is that, look, they didn't necessarily get hold of the voting machines that they have evidence of. What he did say is they knew that they're basically China had access to that. And that's not really a big shocker. But like you pointed out there at the end, is what is a bigger shocker is the fact that the president's giving a speech and you have national broadcast companies like ABC who decide not to broadcast his speech because they don't want to for political reasons. And there was nothing going on Friday night that would have said this is more important than the president of the United States speaking. And it's not necessarily about like, oh, what he was saying was so revolutionary. It was more so the fact that we honor the office of the president and we hear what he says and we broadcast that. And Trump's considering suing them. federal licensing issues there. And so we'll see if he has any road there to go down that track. More than likely not, from what people are saying. But the challenge is the divide is becoming more and more wider for people. And the point of the news, and this gets into the challenge of are you trying to persuade people? And there are multiple arguments online and different things about whether they can be sued, et cetera, things like that. Because if they then start getting into this game, you open a door. But I don't want to go down that trail. But the reality is what Trump said is not really shocking. There hasn't been evidence, and to the point of like in Arizona and Michigan, they found instances of voter fraud that are being dealt with at the moment, of getting those names removed, dealing with the issues that DHS is trying its best to deal with, as far as even with ICE and the problems even that they have there. They're being effective in helping clean up. And the challenge is what happens when you have those on the left and blue areas who are comfortable with these types of things. That's the more pressing issue. And the challenge will be is does Trump's endorsement hold up in those areas? In 2024, it was hit or miss. And so the challenge will be is can he stay focused and hear the hearts of the people, because it'll ultimately come down to pocketbook. At the end of the day.
Yeah, now we have the SAVE Act that's on the table, which the Republicans won't bring to the table because they don't think they have enough votes to get it across that finish line. So I know everybody's mad at Thune and the Republicans, but you got to have the votes. Unless they find a way to do away with the filibuster on that issue, they can't, get that vote across the line. And Trump, of course, is get rid of the filibuster. And that's not that easy. They don't even have the votes to do that. That's not simple. It's actually a procedural move. Somebody has to bring up a procedural move, and then there has to be an agreement on it. It's a very real small window of way you can do this. And so they're trying to find ways to get this across the line, but they're not able to.
The big one that they're looking at is doing it as a continuing resolution,
Right.
to where that's a way to get around it. If they're going to try to get around the filibuster, that would be long term the safest way. But there's also the point of, this is Trump's point, and this is the bigger point, is look, if you don't get rid of it, Democrats will when they get in power, and then basically good luck with saving the country in general. You have to push this through. And then the challenge will be is do local municipalities, if you did push the Save America Act through, would they even follow through on verifying IDs, et cetera, stuff like that?
And I think, the House is going to put another one out there. They've already passed two of them. Speaker Johnson, I was at a meeting where he shared this here locally at a meeting I was at, and he's already passed two of them. President Trump says, pass another one. And he said, well, President, we've already passed two. And he said, well, I just want another one, and so part of this is just his continual pounding this thing, and to let the Senate know, hey, the House has done this. Now, voter ID, the numbers are there with the polling, 80%, I think 70-something% Democrats want this. So it's not like they don't want this issue. So yesterday on a Meet the Press or something, one of the Democratic senators from Virginia spoke about this. So let me play this clip about what he says about this.
I understand that you and I think every other Democrat oppose this so-called Save America Act, and there's a lot of reasons that you've put forward. But let me ask you very narrowly on the issue of photo ID, requiring photo ID to register to vote. Is this something that Democrats should get behind?
We have
80-some% of Americans, 71% of Democrats say they favor this.
You know what? In Virginia, we have voter ID and photo ID. I got to show my...
That's actually not the case. I mean, I'm a Virginia voter. You don't need to show a photo ID in Virginia. There are a wide range of things you can show for ID. And if you don't show one of those, you can sign an affidavit saying...
You can sign an
attesting.
affidavit.
But so it's not required.
And those become ballots that if you want to contest later can be contested. But you do have a variety of documents. But we have voter ID of one form or another.
But should that be a national standard? Now,
Yeah, good question. Should that be a national standard? I don't. I said, what a joke that is to say that they can sign an affidavit and say that they are such and such. Can you imagine across America, 50 states? What if you had thousands and thousands and thousands of people that do this? You're going to have to go check each one of them. You understand how long and how difficult that's going to be to do that. So that's where the joke. This is very plain. We know what the Democrats are doing. They're making sure, because almost all fraud, almost all of it that's been caught has been Democrats. And as far as the votes were for Democratic candidates. So we know why they're doing this. It's a joke. The big joke this last week was, Olive Garden, you got to show your ID to get unending bowl of soup and salad, whatever, but you don't have to get it to vote. I mean, they're using that as a pun, but the fact is, this is how crazy and ludicrous it is on this voter act. If you could pray anything, this is what I'm telling everybody right now, to pray for the security of our election. And I believe this all my heart. And the stats are out there. They've done surveys. If America was required to have one person and one vote, in other words, no mail-in balloting except for those that are bedridden or out overseas, if it was one person, one vote, this country would almost completely turn Republican, including California and places like that, where you would actually see a legitimate election. So this is where I cry out for justice from the Lord, because I want fairness and I want justice. If the country wants the left to win, and that's a one person, one vote, then we'd have to accept that. Okay, that's what one's. But the fact is, that's just not what's happening here when you have ballot harvesting and other things like that. So this is where we have to be pushing in on this issue.
And the challenge is if he's saying, look, this is a non-starter. We're not even going to try to bring this to the floor for a vote because we don't have enough to get over the filibuster. I know Trump wants to get something done, but the midterms is a great opportunity for him to say, hey, okay, in states where somebody's vulnerable or states where there might be an opportunity for a candidate who would vote for something like this to get in, that's where he needs to push his attention. I mean, he can be frustrated, and that's fine. Scripture tells us be angry, but do not sin. And I think he's right to be frustrated and angry that something like this wouldn't get passed. And I think most Americans are. It's like, why wouldn't we do this? And the challenge is, and even to the question of shouldn't this be, federal standard, is who are the people who are not willing to vote for this, who should vote for this? Why aren't their constituents standing up in those areas, putting pressure on them to vote for this, whether they be Republican and or Democrat? And I think, you can get mad at Thune all you want, but it's like, why put that out there when and President Trump could be doing something more strategic, and rather than just yell at Republicans to do what he wants, and to go out there and campaign and say, okay, look, Republicans we have these votes. We need to put these people back in, or even Democrats who would vote for this. Let's put these people who would vote this back in. But here are the people who don't. What is stopping you from putting this in and not voting for this? You have people like John Fetterman who would, but you have other Democrats who wouldn't. What is the problem there? And I think this breeds a deeper issue there.
And I know they brought up in the news this week, I think President Trump talked about it, but there was, during the 2020 election, it looks like there was interference. The FBI was aware of it. There actually is now a rogue FBI bureaucrat that has been investigated. They actually have documentation where she made a statement that she basically was running a shadow government trying to deal with this election issue, and her superior told her, just keep doing what you're doing, basically keep it up. And they were trying to quiet the news that China and other countries were interfering. Again, when you looked at what they were doing, it was all in favor of Biden. It was all in favor of the Democrats. And who, understandably, if you're China, you didn't want President Trump to be president. You didn't want a Republican to be president because your best friend is a socialist, a communist. And that's what we're looking at here when we look at these people voting. And I think that's something that we got to recognize is going on, because the left, and we're running out of time here, but the left is pushing this DNS, the socialist movement that's going on here. And Bill Mayer who's a liberal left wing. He's a liberal. He's probably a true liberal, willing to listen to other people. But he made a statement about after he interviewed J.D. Vance and talked about that. This is what he said, which I was a bit shocked at. And he said some other things that are unusual.
You told J.D. Vance you're open, your vote is up for grabs.
Yes, my vote is in play because it can't be Trump running.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not living in communist America. I mean, I know the talking point is that, well, it's not communism, it's socialism. Okay, I've read the quotes from the DSA platform, from their own mouths. Don't tell me I'm not seeing what I am seeing. And DSA, again, they say things like, takeover of key industries, government. That's communism. There is a definition.
By the way, Trump's doing that too.
Of course. Yes.
And to a degree that we haven't seen any other president, Democrat or Republican, do.
Great. That's crazy too.
He's got a piece of intel, and
right?
A piece of the AI companies.
He treats everything like it's a real estate.
So he makes some points here that we can't. But I can't say I agree with him on everything. But he's making some points here. I think it's interesting. He said, "I'm not going to be in a communist country." Okay. But the fact that he likes J.D. Vance, that's a little bit alarming to me, to say the least. That's why, our view here is we're looking at Rubio and others that could probably be more conservative, but this is where we are. And in the communist point, I listened to he's the person under Mondani with this movement. He's one of the spokesmen, a young guy from Peru. His family are immigrants here. And yet he is pushing this narrative. And here's some of the things that they're talking about. It's coming out now. And the Democrats are having to distance themselves from it. One is they want to do away with the Senate. That's number one. And eventually they want to do away with the office of presidency, the executive branch. They want to get rid of the executive branch of our government. Basically have the Congress, if you want to say it that way, be the ultimate authority which is the exact thing that China has. You have a leader, and then their party runs the parliament, whatever you want to call it, and that's the basic model that they want to have. And they were questioning this young man, like, has this never worked? Why would you want to do this? And he said, well, when we go back in America's history, some of the crazy things we did were as outlandish as this, and so we're just bringing an introduction. And we realize it's a long-term battle, but we're headed this way. And they're not denying that the Senate has to be removed, and the president has to be removed. That's really a challenge to the Constitution. That is communism. And I think that's what we have to recognize. I'm glad they're coming out. I'm glad they're actually winning some of these primaries so that we can have an open debate and let it be plain instead of the cloaked swamp that we've had for so many years, who actually were implementing communist ideas, but saying they weren't, saying they're democratic and they love the democratic system, but yet their institutions that they want to institute were communist. So this is where we are. We got to stop calling them liberals, call them socialists, call them communists. I think those are better terms for them. We got to get the narrative right on this issue.
Yeah, and the big term is, Democratic Socialists of America, and the prime figurehead for this right now is New York's Mayor Mondani, where he's coming out and saying things, like, if Netanyahu steps foot in New York, I'm going to arrest him. And that they're outright saying they want a communist revolution in America, things of this nature. You're seeing, the state funding everything, providing jobs, providing all this stuff. Well, people in New York, businesses, business owners, real estate moguls, developers, they're fleeing the state, they're fleeing the country. And just look at what, for anybody who needs an example, and unfortunately there is a younger generation who needs this, to be able to see the failed nature of this and the reality of what these policies and what these actions actually mean for you as in your everyday life. And the challenge will be is can we continue to are we going to get back to the roots of having these conversations? I think you see Charlie Kirk as a prime example of that, but then you also see if you've been paying attention to this trial at all, the hatred and the brainwashing that these people are under, and that's the sad state of affairs that we have to address and pray healing for this land. And there's the alternative of, revivals happening on college campuses, and I think that's great. And we need more. We need more and more and more of that to combat this, because the Democratic Party in and of itself is at a standstill, because they're trying to figure is, do we stand for things that we would agree with Republicans on, or do we continue to go down this road of letting the loudest voice in the room continue to win, which are those like a Mamdani, who are of the Democratic Socialist standpoint, which is very challenging and very inauthentic towards the nature of the founding of America.
And the last thing I'll talk about also is Senator Lindsey Graham. I wasn't here last week on Pipeline to talk about that. This was a sad event. I think it happened during the Dire Straits. I think it had something to do with the spirit realm at that time. He was a big, what we call a hawk in the Senate. He was a real man in that sense. You can have your qualms about him. He didn't use his political platform to make a lot of money and be wealthy. I think his estate was like 1.4 million. I know we'd all love to have that. But the fact is, when senators are multi-millionaires, some of them toward billionaires, and he's been in office for so many years, he never parlayed that to become wealthy. He literally did it as a politician. That was he wanted to be a politician. He loved America. I mean, he always wanted to go to war. He was what we call a war hawk. He liked the war. He wanted to pound those things, sanctions, etc. I know this for lobbying my years at the Congress and Senate. He was always a pro vote for Israel and for military aid, etc. 100% of the time. He was late, but now President Trump has endorsed his sister, Darlene Graham, who was put into office immediately, which is very important because they need that vote in the Senate. McConnell is still, I think he's still in the hospital. He's supposed to be getting out soon. He's not been there to vote either. So you have a real battle on the margin there in the Senate. Now, here comes the bigger battle. South Carolina is going to have another primary because of this seat that's available. And President Trump has endorsed her for the full-time election. So I've been digging, trying to find out who she is, what she's a lawyer. I know that. She really has been involved in disability acts. That's been her thing. She's very brilliant, they say. She loves her brother. She helped mold a lot of his policy. I think it'll be a solid vote if she wins. There are some other good candidates, and they are defying Trump. Some of them are pro-Trump people, guys that have been standing with President Trump, and he's actually endorsed him in other races in the past. But the fact is that he has endorsed her. And again, Zach started this whole pipeline today about that endorsement and how powerful that is when he endorses that. And I think in South Carolina, it's going to carry a lot of weight. So most likely she's going to get the primary win, and she may be the next senator from South Carolina. She has publicly stated she wants to support the president and his policies, which is a positive thing in that sense. So we'll see how that plays out in South Carolina. It's a big state. South Carolina is usually one of the first elections out there. So it's a very important state. And I think it needs to stay red in that way. And she may be that candidate that does that.
Yeah, she has some political background as well. She's a lot with disabilities and over some boards and things. So it wouldn't be out of the norm for her to be able to handle the workload, but the legalese and the acumen that would be involved there that needed. The biggest proposal that seems to be gaining the most steam is kind of let her finish out the rest of this year as they in the intermedium to finally let them go through the voting process and get somebody actually in play for finishing out the rest of his term. And that's where, if she wants it, she'll kind of have to work for it. She has Trump's endorsement. What does that actually mean in South Carolina moving forward? We'll see. But that's a big loss for Thune in the Senate, and then replacing it, and amongst others like McConnell in Kentucky, and then others even on the Democratic side, where you have people in their 80s who can't even walk, who are running for re-election. And so I think this is an issue with just both parties involved. of these politicians at the end of their term and not wanting to let go and give up.
Yeah, and I think we lose also Senator Graham's ability to cross the aisle throughout his history of his Senate tenure. He's always been able to walk across the aisle. Even I saw Senator Booker actually said positive things about him because it was a straight up. He wasn't vindictive and mean that way. He just shared what he believed and he stood by it. And he even honored or listened to what the other side had to say, even though he didn't agree with it. He wasn't derogatory toward them. And so I think you lose that. When you lose seniority, it affects a lot of things because it's about policy, it's about moving things. And one thing I've learned in lobbying the Congress and the Senate is that's everything. Matter of fact, when I was doing that, we'd always target tenured senators and tenured congressmen and women because they had influence over everybody else. That's just the reality of the way our system works. And so you've lost that, and you're going to have a rookie come in, which means they got to go all the way back down the bottom and start all over again, and you lose that. So who's going to fill that void that Senator Graham was carrying? We'll have to find out how that plays out. So we're going to close out today. We talked about the Iran war. Let's pray a quick conclusion to that, and that our military be protected. As we said when we started today, we lost 3 of our military this past weekend. We need to pray for their families, and we're so sad. And also, we get the 4 months of darkness that Apostle Chuck Pierce gave us, and a warning how to pray during this time. We're going to pray that our eyes would be open, vision would come to us, so that we would see this thing very clearly, and that justice would prevail. That's our main prayer right now, that anything that is nefarious and evil and dark and illegal concerning the vote in America would be dealt with, and that we'd have a true fair election come November and begin to set this country on the course that God wants it to go on. Thanks for being with us today here on the Pipeline, and we look forward to seeing you again next Monday. We'll come back here and begin to cover these topics and give you directives for how to pray for America. God bless you. Have a great day.